Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported, independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Dave DeCamp joins us today, and we talk about the way that China hawks are exploiting the pandemic and the global crisis to influence the opinion of a fearful public. There are legitimate issues with China, but some of the same bad actors who were involved in the post-9/11 push for war in the Middle East and others seem to be using this crisis to advance their own great power competition agenda for political and financial reasons and for the evergreen goal of preserving the empire. If there was ever a time to avoid conflict, it's now, while the country's in pretty dire straits. Big crises can result in big changes, and profiteers who don't have our best interests at heart know that better than anyone. Dave has written 2 articles on this topic. They're filled with great examples and context, and we're going to talk about those today. We recorded this on May 1st, 2020. Dave DeCamp is here speaking to us from New York City. Hello, Dave. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Joanne. Thanks for having me. I'm a fan of the show.
Thank you. Thanks. And I love your writing. Always reading what you have over at antiwar.com. And so first of all, the obligatory question, how are you doing? You're in the belly of the beast, the ground zero of the pandemic there in New York. So how are things going? How are you and your loved ones doing?
We're doing pretty good. I live in Brooklyn here with my wife. We're both pretty young and healthy, and I got some family out on Long Island I'm a little concerned about, but our parents are far away now. So, it's just us. My day job is essential, so I'm still going to work. She's still going to work too. So it's kind of business as usual for us. It's just the streets are empty.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I hope everything's okay with your people in Long Island. Today we're going to talk about the pandemic a bit, but we're going to talk about 2 articles that Dave wrote, both at antiwar.com. They'll be linked in the show notes, and the title of they're both just in the last couple of weeks or in the last week. The first one is titled China Hawks Exploiting America's Fear of Coronavirus, and the other one is New Anti-China Propaganda Uses Russiagate Playbook. And throughout this, Dave feels caution because he sees the same kinds of things happening that happened during Russiagate, not only in Russiagate, but the lead up to the war, the post 9/11 lead up to the war in Iraq, and even some of the same people. So I'm also really concerned about the ways that the crisis is being exploited in a number of different ways, and not just this one. But let's just talk about the first paragraph of your first article that was on April 14th, China Hawks Exploiting America's Fear of Coronavirus. I'll just read the first couple paragraphs. Coronavirus has hit the U.S. harder than most countries around the world. A new think tank made up of the country's biggest China hawks is using the crisis to turn public opinion against Beijing. An American public living in fear of this crisis is particularly vulnerable to anti-China propaganda. The virus's Chinese origin may also serve as a useful tool for the Pentagon that's looking to increase its footprint in the Indo-Pacific region. A Cold War era group was revived last year by neoconservative Frank Gaffney and former White House strategist Steve Bannon. The Committee on the Present Danger, China, just launched over a year ago in March 2019, and the acronym for that is CPD. The new CPD is the group's 4th iteration. The first CPD was formed in the 1950s, the second in the 1970s, both used to confront the Soviet Union. The third CPD was formed in 2004 to address the so-called war on terror. And so I had noticed that Steve Bannon had this podcast, quote, radio show, or there's video of it too. And I actually even subscribed to it on Periscope because I thought, I can't stomach even more than about 5 minutes of it, but at a time. But I thought, well, let me just see what this guy's up to. So I did notice the Hawks. I also noticed Gordon Chang, but he's kind of always a Hawk. So, but I did not realize that they had formed this committee until recently. They formed this committee, and Bannon just seems to be going off the walls. Gaffney's always a threat, and
Yeah.
I guess you mentioned that he was part of PNAC, the
Mm-hmm.
Project for New American Century, and so yeah, let's just talk about what these dudes are up to because it seems like no good.
Yeah, I remember in January, I remember hearing about that Steve Bannon changed the name of his show to War Room Pandemic. And I remember thinking that was kind of odd because, I mean, in January, I was focused on, the stuff with Iran because Trump just assassinated Soleimani. So I wasn't paying much attention to the coronavirus. Probably goes for a lot of us. But I remember hearing Steve Bannon started this group. And not the group, the change in the name of his podcast. And I briefly remember when the Committee on Present Danger was launched last year, reading some articles about it, about these China hawks coming together. And I didn't think much of it. I thought mostly just trade war related and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then Robbie Martin did a podcast for his Media Roots Radio, like a 2-part, 5 hours of the anti-China propaganda that's been, coming our way since the pandemic started. And that's when I really kind of realized how dangerous this group is, this Committee on the Present Danger. Frank Gaffney, PNAC neocon, teaming up with a right-wing nationalist like Steve Bannon. There's other PNAC guys in it. James Woolsey is one that I can think of right now. Yeah, and he's bad. And it was the coverage. One of the things that really made me start paying attention to this was Tucker Carlson and how like his show just turned into maybe not as bad as Rachel Maddow, not as hysterical, because like the coronavirus is actually a real thing, and it does seem like it comes from China. So there's actually a crisis going on in this country, and but he's just been so focused on China, and that's really what made me start looking into these guys, is what Robbie did on Media Roots Radio and seeing Tucker Carlson, and like the danger of these right-wing populists that are good on the wars in the Middle East, but are just so bad on China, and
Yeah.
they're good on Russia, but they're just awful on China.
Yeah, and like I have a little bit of a conflict on this because I would tend to agree with Tucker Carlson, not on the hawkish stuff, but on the trade war stuff, just in general on the fact that we should not have outsourced, we shouldn't have given away a lot of our manufacturing and things like that to China. I never thought that was a good idea. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that so I agree with them on that part. However, I don't think it's the Chinese Communist Party that did that. I think it's the corporations and the um, oligarchs and just the financiers. They're the ones who really during the Clinton era, maybe even slightly before that, who really started that whole wave. And it's as usual, it's the relentless. I'm not sure we'll agree on this or not, but in my view, it's the relentless seeking of to drive down the cost of labor. I mean, to the point where they'd do slave labor if they could. I sometimes think that's their ultimate goal. But so that's the core issue for me. And I think like that is one of our real issues of national security. The fact that we can't produce the things that we need and want at a time. And this has been exposed now by this pandemic, these supply chains. Oh, suddenly we can't get the things we need because we don't make the essentials anymore. So I take a strong stand on that. I've always been opposed to the deindustrialization of the country. But the Chinese Communist Party, they're not the ones who I blame for that.
Yeah.
So it goes a little bit off the rails. And I hadn't thought of it the way you just put it, which is that okay, the neocons and the China hawks, I expect that for them. It just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But the fact that the right wing populists are now, it seems, taking a different ideological stance and going and teaming up with people like that, and that really is worrisome. That because they are like Tucker is so good on certain issues, he's almost the only good one. But then he, um, to take this toxic view that seems to be driving us toward a war with China is extremely worrisome.
Yeah, it is. It's complicated stuff because when you hear Steve Bannon talk and Tucker talk about these things, like you said, a lot of people agree that our corporations, kind of sold the American people out when they moved all the manufacturing jobs to China. A lot of people lost their jobs. So I mean, there's a real argument to be made there. Maybe we should look at bringing those jobs back, but when you look at the reality of it, if we force these corporations, this is the way I look at it. This isn't anything I'm have much knowledge on, but if we force these corporations to bring these manufacturing jobs back here, I mean, how realistic is that that'll actually happen? And how many of those jobs will just be automated? And I mean, how many jobs would we really get out of that? And what was unemployment like before this whole pandemic and all the lockdowns? It wasn't, Americans had jobs, whether they weren't high paying enough. I just don't see these corporations bringing manufacturing back here and paying people a decent more than minimum wage and giving them good benefits to do those jobs. And as far as the trade war goes, a lot of it is over the so-called theft of intellectual property. But that's the theft of, it's not, there's a debate to be had about if intellectual property should even be a thing or not. I mean, in libertarian circles that I frequent, I'm not really a libertarian myself, but a lot of them, they don't believe in intellectual property. It's a Western idea, patents and copyrights. And if a cost of doing business for a corporation in China is the threat that you might lose some of their property, I'm sure they factor that in their trade secrets. So are we going to do all this economic war with China to make it better for these corporations to do business in China and make it less likely for those jobs to come back here? I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, well, I don't have any kind of illusion that things are going to go back to the way they were in the 1980s, let's say.
Yeah.
But I just think that from a perspective of, um, if we do get into situations like we're in right now, if we don't make the things that we need, and especially, for example, in the defense industry, it
Mm-hmm.
used to be, I used to work for a defense contractor way back early in my career. And at that point in time, like every component had to be made here in the States. And I think they don't even do that anymore. I think those things are still outsourced. I just think like that is a real threat. That's something that you have to at least, like, they've trimmed down the whole process of manufacturing and the whole distribution just in time inventory process.
Mm-hmm.
They've trimmed it down now to the point where it's very high risk. It runs really smoothly as long as everything's okay. But as soon as there's a weak link in the chain, it's, everything go haywire. So I just think it's a bad idea to build everything everywhere else. I think I just sense that some self-sufficiency is necessary. And I don't think that any of that was taken into consideration when everything was offshored and outsourced. I don't think they cared about our safety. I think all the stuff about our security and our safety is all just total bunk used to sell us something that they want and doesn't necessarily impact us in a positive way at all. So I just think it's sort of it's more of a common sense kind of thing for me. But no, I don't think it will be exactly. I don't think it will create as many jobs as were originally held here. I think some of it will be automated, but I still believe that these things, just the fact that we can't make these medical masks is just a total and complete embarrassment. And, a number of other things. And also, like, sometimes I pick up a can of, I don't know, crab meat, for example, or some food that and it comes from China. And you're talking about sort of getting our food from halfway around the country just seems completely ridiculous to me. That's something that should definitely be localized. But yeah, I don't I don't know whether I guess in the end I don't know whether that's really what Bannon is worried about either, or Tucker, because it is very much, as you've pointed out, even some of the tactics are similar. You notice that the RussiaGate tactics. I think you cited um, an article here. Where is it? You cited a number of stories. Oh, this, including this one in the New York Times, and it
Mm-hmm.
was the same thing. It was. Let's see. You say a common tactic used to promote RussiaGate. The RussiaGate narrative was unnamed officials making statements to the press without providing evidence or any factual basis to their claim. And another common tactic was frequent media appearances by former intelligence officials, like they did during Russiagate with Clapper and Brennan, and
Mm-hmm.
making wild accusations. And you're saying that you're seeing that now used to, it's repeated almost, it's cookie cutter almost to promote the anti-China narrative. And
Yeah.
that part of it seems more dominant. So are they even really worried about the manufacturing and the supply chain and all that, or you know, is this just an attempt to return to the Cold War glory for the same war profiteers and intelligence profiteers, um, and are
Yeah. Well,
just trying
that
to turn us against China?
that's what I think. They're using the manufacturing jobs and stuff and supply chain to get regular American people on their side. Um, like the New York Times story that I cited, to get back to the RussiaGate stuff. It said Chinese agents helped spread messages that sowed virus panic in the U.S. Basically, the article says that there were rumors spreading around, in the U.S. in March that Trump was going to lock down the whole country, and text messages and social media posts. And this article says, according to like 6 unnamed intelligence officials, not even just 6 American officials, according to them, that Chinese agents helped spread these rumors. And then if you look closer at the article, it says 2 of the anonymous officials, they stressed that the Chinese agents, they didn't create these messages, they just helped boost them. And that's the story. I mean, what even is that story? I remember rumors like that spreading in March, and there was an article in Newsweek about the military's plan if they have to, basically enact martial law and lockdowns. And I got texts from people who I knew that, they're cousins in the National Guard, and they're like getting ready to mobilize if they have to, because all that stuff was going on and
Yeah, it
rumors were
was.
spreading. I mean, that's
Yep.
and what did Chinese agents have to do with that? They don't even give any details. They said they can't reveal that their sources because they don't want to reveal their sources. It's just like total, like some of the worst RussiaGate stories, like Russian, and of course, they bring up the Russians, say they use similar tactics to sow discord and discontent in the United States, whatever that even means. And this is a whole story in the New York Times. And what's funny about the story is that it recognizes the danger of intelligence officials like selectively leaking stories to the press to build what they actually say that some analysts are afraid that the Trump administration is trying to build an anti-China narrative, which it obviously is, and that they have to be careful of selective leaks to the press. Like down the page in that story, they acknowledge it, and they use the run up to the invasion of Iraq as an example, ignoring all of their RussiaGate stories, because somehow to them that they weren't wrong about that, which it's a whole nother story. But yeah, so we're seeing the same tactics, and the Trump administration wants to put it all on China. The Daily Beast had a story. They had internal White House documents that, urged officials to put the blame on China away from the Trump administration. And that's what Tucker Carlson's been doing on his show. A ton of right-wing outlets, they're just putting everything China did under a microscope and kind of ignoring all the missteps from the U.S. government. And me personally, I try not to comment on the lockdown thing too much, because I think there's a lot of people saying a lot of things, and I'm not a virologist. I don't agree with these lockdown methods, but if they could have warned us when they knew that it was contagious, wash your hands, wear masks. But no, instead they said it's not a big deal. Don't wear masks. Actually, you know what? Wear masks. And now it's mandatory in certain places to wear masks. I mean, it was just a total lack of preparedness by our government at every level, federal, state, city. And now they're just blaming it on China. And if in that time frame that China might have been lying to us or not told the world, it's like 20 days, December 31st to January 20th. And January 21st was when China decided to lock down Wuhan and the Hubei province. And that should have been a sign in itself. So it's just, and how long did it take for us to take any real measure? For even our government to say, hey, wear masks, don't touch your face. Simple things like that. They could have prepared us.
Yeah, I think we should dig into that a little bit more about I have some thoughts on why I think that played out the way it did. And there's anytime there's a crisis like this, there are going to be people, as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. There are going to be people jumping into, oh, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. This is the opportunity of the century, whatever. There are going to be people thinking like that, a lot of people thinking like that. And so, but I think there's a lot of things going on there. Obviously, the GOP is worried about political blowback for botching the response to this. Then you have the Democrats and the anti-Trumpers who really want this to be the thing that takes down, it crashes Trump's economy kind of thing. So you got those two things going on. I also think that some of the response, and I'll tell you why, or one of the reasons why I think this, during one of his crazy monologue briefings, your Governor Cuomo, one day he's talking about the fact that, we can't make the PPE, the personal protective equipment. We can't make the mask. We can't make and he's like, why is it that everything's made in China now? How did that happen? So Cuomo actually said that in a briefing, which is completely ironic because Cuomo is completely part of the clan of neoliberals who orchestrated this entire outsourcing, offshoring thing for the last 3 decades. So I do think that I think that it's an incredible embarrassment. I think this is also why they said don't wear masks. It was because they knew that we couldn't get them. We were, a couple of months down the line from these other countries, and so there was already a run on masks and things like that, and gloves. I anticipated it actually early on. I did take it seriously in the end of January and February, and started stocking up on certain things, including toilet paper. By the way, I was prescient on toilet paper. But anyway, yeah. So, but I think that part of the reason why there's some of these weird responses and deflection of blame is because they don't want to draw attention to the fact that we can't make the things we need anymore in a crisis, and they don't want to take the blame for it. So I think that's some of it. And I do think that the Surgeon General, well, first of all, with the masks, again, I'm not a medical expert either, but I've read some things about for a person who is already sick, the masks provide a benefit. You'll transmit things less. For a person who's not sick, there's some question about how good the masks are themselves and how they can, if you wear them over and over again, how they can actually breed germs and things. So that, there's some questionable. But early on, the fact that they said don't, one more example. So my own governor in New Jersey, he does these daily crazy briefings too, and he says that anybody who has N95 masks, don't wear them. Give them because they didn't have even enough for the nurses, and they were afraid that the nurses and doctors were going to refuse to work because they couldn't provide them with the right protection. So I think there's a lot of that stuff going on too. And as far as well, let me just stop there and see if you have anything to say before I go on that.
Yeah, no, I do remember that a lot of government officials were saying to donate your, if you have N95 or N100 masks to the hospitals and stuff, which I get. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much. I mean, there are a lot of things to it, and I don't want to comment too much on the manufacturing stuff because, I mean, really the faction, the people that I'm most concerned about, why they want to blame it on China, is the right wingers and
The Hawks, yeah.
the Hawks, and there's a faction of the national security state that wants to disengage from the Middle East and North Africa, so we could do the pivot to Asia that the Obama administration started, because they see that we're bogged down and wasting all of our money and resources in these pointless, endless wars in the Middle East, and of course there's a huge faction that wants war with Iran still, but because the Pentagon, they wanted to move troops out of North Africa, so they could use those resources to face Russia and China more, but Congress blocked it. Kelly Vlahos wrote about that at the American Conservative. So, so that's just the stuff that I'm really concerned about. And people are, Americans are losing family to this virus, and it's scary. And if they successfully blame those deaths on Beijing, I mean, you're going to have a population, the majority, wanting revenge. And like the state of Missouri, they sued Beijing. Have you heard about that? They're trying to sue China for losses or whatever.
I did hear about it. I don't know the specifics though.
Yeah. I know the state of Missouri, some other states and local officials. So that's just what concerns me the most.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, with China, I mean, you have to think they are definitely an adversary. But war, I mean, it's unthinkable. It's like Lawrence Wilkerson says that he has been involved in numerous war games where they game out a war with China. It always ends up in nuclear war because China can't win a naval war, which it would be for us. We can't win a ground war in China, and 100 other reasons why it would end up in a nuclear war. And if everybody knows that from the start, of course, there's always still these crazy people. Some of them, that same faction of neocons who actually think we can win a nuclear war and that we should do first strikes and all that. It's just totally and completely nuts. But the Pentagon, it's good you mentioned that. I think there's definitely a weariness in the war with the Middle East. I think that a Cold War is something they would welcome rather than, get out of the Middle East so they can, those were the glory days too. All the money still flows, but you don't actually have to, fight.
Especially with China. I mean, we already have them, surrounded, and bases in Korea, Japan. We could just really build up forces around there, and like a Cold War that it'll increase the budget, keep the money flowing, keep all the defense contractors happy. I mean, they must be weird, like an actual shooting war with China. Nobody's really calling for that. I mean, these hawks, like Steve Bannon, one of the pieces that I wrote, he predicted that we're going to go to war with China in the South China Sea within the next 5 to 10 years over territorial disputes there. And that's something like, with NATO, like North Macedonia, I don't know if you knew, kind of quietly happened last month. They were added to NATO, North Macedonia. I always would be curious, let's take a poll of Americans and say who's willing to send to go to war for a country like North Macedonia. And I would bet most Americans would not be willing to send their children off to die to fight a war with Russia over the territory of North Macedonia. In the South China Sea dispute, it's two archipelagos that it's mainly about: the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands. And China, Vietnam, mostly Vietnam, Malaysia, a couple other countries, they all have overlapping claims of these islands. And China has been building these artificial islands and militarizing them. And the United States, we don't pick a side in this. It's just whatever side is against China. If we pick Vietnam's side, then we would have to be against Malaysia and Indonesia. But instead, we just sail warships through there. And it's just so reckless and dangerous. I mean, it's been going on for a while, and obviously through the Taiwan Strait, it's just the buildup around China and all these Navy presence and warships and missile tests, and it's just going to make a mistake that could be catastrophic to the world, more likely. And it's just, how many Americans would be willing to go to war over who should be able to fish in the Spratly Islands? How many Americans can pick that out on a map? Or it's just, that's what I always think about. If people really understood what this territorial dispute was about, because you see news stories, China's been expanding their research centers, and but what are we doing there? The Theodore Roosevelt, the aircraft carrier that went out of commission because of coronavirus, in mid-March they led like an expeditionary strike force, they call it, through the South China Sea with their aircraft carriers, destroyers, amphibious assault ships, and like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I thought the smartest thing to do, and we talked about this in one of our podcasts, is there was no immediate threat, right? So the thing
Yeah.
to do would be bring them all into port. Actually, I would have, yeah, I'm sure you would agree with this. I would have just brought all the troops home, frankly. But
Yeah.
but I definitely would have put those ships in port, give them some R&R or whatever, I do whatever it is you need to do. But just ride it out. We're only talking about, a number of weeks or maybe at most a few months. Just, do what's you don't have to do any acts of
Yeah.
war. These drills are all, none of them are critical to our security or to anything else. So just chill for a while.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but there's something going on with the Navy too, and this has been going on for decades where the Navy feels very insecure. People call the aircraft carriers, they're just sitting ducks in the current state of weaponry.
Mm.
They're very vulnerable. All the ships are pretty vulnerable. The new ones they've designed are failing. They get stuck in whatever, like canals, and they overheat, and they, you know, end up back in the shipyard for however long. And I think that the Navy, they seem to be banking a lot on the China situation in the South China Sea, for relevancy.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think there's some of that. And I believe that Bannon is ex Navy intelligence or something, isn't he?
He is. Yeah. I'm not sure if he was intelligence. He was a Navy. He was an officer.
Navy, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some of that possible, but it's far from just Bannon, right? This has been, like you mentioned, the pivot to Asia,
Yeah.
which I kind of agreed with at the time during the Obama administration, certainly on the getting out of Middle East. But just to mention too, the Middle East, another factor, and let's see if you think this is relevant. So China, something that's not often mentioned, but they were a silent partner in Syria.
Mm.
And they are one of the reasons, and of course they are helping Iran, right? They're buying their oil, they're defying the US diktats and things like that. So I think that there's a massive shift going on. The empire has been in decline for quite a long time. And I think that Syria, and you could say Iran too, I
Mm.
think it was the first time that the empire was not able to um, do exactly what it wanted to do, overthrow or take over a particular country or dominate, because everyone says, well, because Russia stepped in, that's what changed everything. But a lot of people don't mention the role that China played in that. China has a big interest in Syria as well, and they're going to do some reconstruction and investment, and
Yeah.
they've been just stepping in Iran, and then of course we could even get into the role that they're playing in Venezuela. They're definitely investing in lots of places, but
Mm.
in South America and in places where we had plans, and our plans are being um, undermined by China. So that's also part of it, though it's harder to it's harder to figure how that factors into all of it.
Yeah, they definitely are, going against the U.S. Empire's, policies and ideas and regime change and stuff like that. Like you said, in Venezuela and Syria and Iran. Um, Another thing, China is complicated because they do have their issues. There's the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang in Western China, the autonomous area there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those things. It's complicated. It's tough to know what's really going on there. I know some people will say, "Oh, they're the Uyghurs are terrorists, so they have to do it." But I would never say that. I would never use that war on terror language. And I point out in one of the pieces, Frank Gaffney, who's written all about how, Islam is just a danger to our society, and now to have him. I mean, he was one of the most disgusting Islamophobes of the neocons. He wasn't like let's bring democracy to Iraq type of guy. He was like these people are, it's clash of civilization stuff. That's what he wrote about.
Yeah.
That was his thing. And now for him to say, oh, China, their treatment of the Uyghur Muslims is unacceptable, and whatever's going on there in Xinjiang, and Steve Bannon talks about it all the time, all their human rights abuses there, and Hong Kong and whatever. I mean, these guys don't care about Muslims, about Uyghur Muslims. They're just
Right.
they're a geopolitical tool for them. I know I think I kind of went off topic from what we were just talking about, but
No, I'm glad you did, because I don't know enough about this topic, so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on the situation with the Uyghurs.
yeah. So the Uyghurs, I mean, I know that there is they live under a really heavy surveillance state. There's so-called re-education camps, and these guys call it concentration camps. I don't really know what's going on there. It's really hard to know when there's so much, it's just so politicized, and there's a lot of people with an agenda that want us to think that it's going to be a genocide. But what I say to things like that, what's going on with the China's treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, how can we change that? Well, right now, our government, the taxes that come out of my paycheck are used to fund something, a genocide in Yemen, and all the horrible things that we support the Saudis for. There's real things, evil things going on in the world that our government is doing, and that's what I would say to somebody that says, well, what about the Uyghurs? Well, what about the people in Yemen? Or if they point to the Hong Kong protests, that's all complicated too. I'll never take the side of cops in a protest, but I know that there's a lot of interest at play. The NED's there, but that was, blasted out in the mainstream media for months. I mean,
Yeah.
how much of that coverage did we see? Well, there was protests going on all over the world. In Chile, there was millions of people protested. In 1 week, 15 people were shot dead. How many people were shot dead in Hong Kong? I don't think were any killed. Do you know, were any killed by police? I know they were.
I when I was last paying attention to it, no, there were
Yeah.
not.
And then the protests in Gaza, I mean, far less people were out there during the Great March of Return, but thousands were shot with live ammunition. Hundreds of people were killed. You could look at the UN report. They shot children, journalists, EMTs. They shot somebody in a wheelchair that was 1,000 feet away from the fence in a wheelchair. They shot and killed him. So it's just this stuff with China, their human rights abuses, it's just the same way the Trump administration is trying to be like, hey, look how bad they messed up their response to coronavirus. These guys, it's just a distraction from our own government's failures and human rights abuses. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the hypocrisy is outrageous. The fact that the Hong Kong, and I would tend to be I'm just inclined to be pro protester, but
Yeah.
there was something wrong. There was something going on that that seemed more like a color revolution kind of thing to me in Hong Kong, as much as I might sympathize with the people there,
Yeah.
and with the Uyghurs. It looks to me, and I've read some things, that the intent is to, you know, to support and develop an insurgency,
Mm.
uh, and to use the Uyghurs for that. And also, we saw a bit of that when Turkey brought a lot of Uyghurs into Turkey, gave them passports, and then sent them into part of the quote unquote moderate rebels
Yeah,
into
yeah.
Syria. So there's some, yeah, that it makes me, not that I don't have sympathy for whatever crackdowns are going on in Xinjiang or however you pronounce it. It's not that I don't sympathize with that. It's very uncomfortable for me to take these positions because they're not my natural
Hmm.
position. But there's just so much wrong with that story based on the history of the people who are behind it. And you pointed out something really good about Gaffney is, the last thing that guy is
Yeah.
sympathetic to Muslims, and and now we're supposed to believe that. It's just crazy. And it also seems, getting back to the decline in empire thing, uh, a lot of these things, they've been in overdrive for the last 20 years at least. So we've kind of seen all their tactics, and we're starting to get smarter, and we're recognizing them much earlier in the game. And so it's setting off our alarm bells
Yeah.
when we see these people drumming up a war with China. And yeah, I don't think it's going to be a shooting war. But then there's also um, the concern about not only the crazy people who think that we could start and win a nuclear war, but now this whole thing with hybrid war, including bioweapons, including chemical weapons,
Hmm.
including cyber and all of those things. So I think these guys who would urge to use nuclear weapons that we have rather than just keeping them as a deterrent, they might be the same kind of people who would urge, using the other unthinkable kinds of weapons. I mean, it's even possible that this pandemic is part of a bio weapon war.
Yeah.
I haven't counted that out yet. Um, it's all muddled right now, and I think it'll be
It's so muddled.
years.
I don't know
Yeah,
if we'll ever really know, like, because it's so politicized now. Like that theory that it. So the theory that it was like a bioweapon first came from, I think it was like Radio Free Asia, which is U.S. government funded media. It used to be like CIA. It used to be the CIA, but and a guy named Bill Gertz he writes for the Washington Times. He's like a hardcore China hawk. He's wrote a ton of books on it, and his source was a guy named Danny Shoham, who's a former Israeli intelligence, and he was the one that floated the bioweapon theory at first and pointed to that lab in Wuhan. And Danny Shoham also, blamed the anthrax attacks after 9/11 on Saddam Hussein, and he like authored a whole paper about it that was published in 2003, right before the invasion. And that anthrax attack, those the official stories that anthrax came from Fort Detrick in Maryland. So, and because there's a lot of ways you can go with this bioweapon. Like you could go down some serious rabbit holes. So,
yeah, exactly.
but like you could point it to the U.S. that there's a timeline that it could possibly. I'm not sure if you've read that. It was like a global research article. There's a military games in Wuhan in October. There's an
Yeah,
incident at Fort Detrick, and like you could do that. And there's also, I mean, Whitney Webb wrote about it in like January about the Pentagon using bats, researching coronaviruses from bats in like 2018. There's stories about it. So because they point to this lab in Wuhan and say, I think now what the Trump administration is saying is it's not man-made, but it was accidentally released from this lab. That's like, or intelligence officials are feeding this information papers, but it's just so hard to know what's really
yeah,
going on. You know?
yeah, exactly. I agree with you completely. It's just, it's still in my realm of possibilities, but no,
Yeah.
I'm not ready to. And there are a lot of suspicion. The whole issue of exploitation, which is what you sort of centered your first article on, and just pointing out, hey guys, people have done things just like this before. They have exploited this and that, and this is where it took us. You really want to, you really want to go down that road again, no matter how scared you are right now,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how concerned you are over the um, the loss of, our inability to to make and provide the things that we need. This is not something that happened yesterday. Um, and we've been to this rodeo before. And I think it's really important that you pointed that out, and you used a lot of good research and cited a lot of good examples. And I think these two articles are really important for people to read and follow Dave's work. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and talk about it, and hope you'll come back again. And please tell everybody, first of all, maybe there's something else you want to point out before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think that that's really it. It's just, we all have to be, I'm sure your audience is pretty vigilant about what we get from the media and the Trump administration, but, need cool heads after this, the response to this pandemic, and like all of our foreign policy stuff, all the stuff that these hawks are pushing is like, it's just so short-sighted that it could backfire in 10 years. What if there's another swine flu that comes out of the United States from our, pig farming, and is the world going to ask us for reparations, blame all the deaths on us?
Yeah, exactly.
I just think everybody just got to chill out and get through this. And unfortunately, we should cooperate with China and try to figure out how to prevent it in the future. But I don't think that's going to happen because they're on the defensive now.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
Because all these accusations that are getting hurled at them. But yeah, so I don't know. Everybody be safe and careful.
Dave, tell everybody how they can follow you on Twitter and how they can find your work.
I'm on Twitter at DeCamp Dave. I write for antiwar.com. I try to do like a weekly column, but in a few months when my work hours change, I'm going to be in the news section more. Jason Ditz is in there. I would encourage everybody to sign up for the daily newsletter. It's a really good resource to keep track of everything. I'm going to try to get in that news section more. So yeah, antiwar.com is the place for your foreign policy news. Check it out.
Great. Well, take care, Dave. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, John. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, it was great. I'll see you.
Right.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Dave DeCamp. Follow Dave on Twitter at DeCampDave and find his work at antiwar.com. Around the Empire podcast is independent media, and your support's really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find this audio podcast in many different ways, any mobile podcast app, or on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody.